EPRA seminar on PropTech solutions to save energy, CO2 and money. I'm Andreas Hoffmann, Chairman of EPRA's PropTech and Innovation Committee and working for Cromwell European REIT. With this seminar, EPRA is bringing together two expert companies to discuss the latest PropTech solutions related to sustainability challenges in real estate with a focus on energy efficiency. I will now hand over to Achille Simo, member of EPRA PropTech and Innovation Committee and EMEA Head of Business Development for Valuation and Transaction Advisory at Jones Lang LaSalle, who will moderate the session.
Merci. Thank you very much, Andreas, for passing on to me. A great pleasure to me to have all excellence on the panel today. And yes, we talked about something that's very, very important to all of us. I think it's not easier to start moderations or panel discussions with an anecdote, but maybe allow me to do that today, just in exceptions. Because I still remember, I think 2015, a couple of years ago, we at JLL, we had the pleasure to, to secure a valuation mandate for one of the first climate neutral fund. Yes, I think that was a fantastic story at that time. But the funny thing is, 2 years after that, the investment manager decided to strike off the name climate neutral from the name of the fund, just because the investor don't believe or had the feeling that sustainability, climate neutrality is just a waste of return. I can imagine the smile and also the lull on your face and so on, because we know that we are today in a new area. Sustainability and climate neutrality, ESG, all those topics are very important, and not just important for our buildings, not just important for our industry, but also important for all of us, for the humanities. And the second point is, yes, bar the situation that we had a couple of years ago, we also know that the challenges in all those elements are here to stay. Where the challenge is very big, you need as well to build some thought to spark creativity and so on. And therefore, we are very pleased to have in these sessions today a couple of solutions that are going to be presented in order to share, maybe not just, I would say, to talk about the problem, to talk about the challenge that we are facing, but to talk about the solutions, because you all know, someone used to say, if you focus on challenges and problems, the problem are going to grow. But if you focus on opportunity, on solutions, the solution are going to grow. The EPRA committee is very pleased maybe to put the light in the discussion today on those solutions, on some elements that have been developed and where we think, yes, that could maybe bring contributions to all the effort that we are spending and that we need to spend to meet our goal and to meet our ESG target. What are we willing to do specifically? I mentioned we are going to present those solutions, two other solutions to you. What we are willing as well to do is to give you the possibility to challenge the solutions, to ask the questions, meaning you have the chat function and so on, please share the question to that. And what we are willing to do at the end of these sessions to gain a couple of ideas, a couple of inspirations, and maybe, yes, to know the players that are going to present themselves today and to look and to discuss with them what could be the contribution that they could bring to the challenge and also to the goal that you have. The session specifically is going to be starting with a small questions to the panelists. Andy Sumner, commercial director at Turntide or maybe at Future Motors and Turntide, representative of Turntide in Europe. And we have as well Nico Hahn, head of business development for Dabbel, which is the second solution that we're going to present. Before we move to the presentations specifically, I just have a question to you guys in London, but I think as well in Düsseldorf and so on, because we try to read the press all the time, and you can overlook all the discussion around this Silicon Valley Bank, one of the main financing institutions for the PropTech and for the FinTech, for these kind of tech industries. My opening question to you guys would be, yes, what does that mean for you, and what is your take on this development on this side? I don't know who is going to start, Andy or Nico, please jump.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So, hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'll introduce myself when I do my presentation. For us, speaking selfishly, we had no relationship with Silicon Valley Bank, so so for our business directly, there's no impact. Indirectly, the honest answer, Achille, is I think it's probably too early to tell. We know that that Silicon Valley Bank has been to an extent saved from a catastrophic failure, but the downstream implications, I think, are too early to tell. So let's see what happens. Fingers crossed. Hopefully, this is not going to be a repeat of 2007 and 8. Let's hope so.
Super. Your take on that, Nico?
I would simply confirm what Andy just mentioned. So for us as well, no exposure, no direct exposure directly to the Silicon Valley Bank. We do have some exposure to, let's say, related or affected banks, not directly from Silicon Valley Bank, but as we all know, stock prices, and there's been a lot of kind of an earthquake around the financial industry going on at the very moment, just recently also with the takeover of Credit Suisse by UBS. So I'd say some customers of ours are affected more than we are. So that's good news, but I would confirm or agree with what Andy said. So it's too early to tell. Let's see where we land the next 6 to 12 months.
Super. I think that's maybe a good element to start the discussion. That means translate in my word, meaning if you manage to convince the audience in this room and so on, they are lucky that you are not going to go away somewhere because you are going to go there. You are going to still be available and open for business. Maybe the final question was, the question was to you, Nico, if you maybe could start and maybe with your presentations, introduction of Dabbel, introduction of solutions, and maybe some track record and so on. And then after that, we are going to move to you, Andy. And after the two presentations, I was saying maybe then we could go focus the Q&A sessions at the end. Up
Great.
to you.
Then I take it from here. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nico, joining right now from Düsseldorf in Germany. And I'm happy and pleased to share with you the next generation of how we operate commercial buildings. Let me quickly share my screen and guide you through a presentation where we give you an example, a roadmap of how to easily, quickly, and in a scalable way, decarbonize your building portfolio. But before jumping right into the topic, we're going to cover 3 main topics today in the presentation. First, the basics. What are we doing? What is Dabbel about? Where do we come from? What do we actually do? Second topic will be a hands-on example in terms of an office building from one of our customers, Patrizia, an office building in Berlin. And the third thing, well, is very pragmatic. How can you as an audience, as companies, as individuals who have targets, ambitions in this regard, actually achieve the same? And with that, jumping right into it, what do? We can summarize this very quickly in one sentence. We help owners and operators of commercial building space to drastically reduce energy consumption of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning by up to 40% without any capex expenditure to start with. How do we do that, or where do we come from? We're a company founded in 2018 in Düsseldorf in Germany, operating at this very moment around about 1.5 million square meters in 7 countries for various customers. And we do achieve an average of 26% in savings in the area of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. How we do that, I will get to that later, but maybe I tell you why before going into that. I tell you why do we focus there. We all face a tremendous challenge. We have existing buildings and we need to bring them from today's operation to tomorrow's operation, which should ideally be net zero. Now, we are all aware this involves certain efforts, certain capex expenditures, and it's quite complex. So instead of going to traditional way with refurbishments, changing equipment, changing energy sources, we say, why not to start with low-hanging fruits? Existing buildings with existing technology simply made better. And we focus on heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Why? Because this is the major consumption of energy and CO2 in our buildings, and brings therefore the biggest potential of having a direct impact, which is measurable, achievable, and all of that, it is doable to do that on a large scale in a short amount of time. But what do we actually do? We're starting with optimizing the energy consumption of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in commercial buildings, software-based, to then collect in the meantime valuable data of technical building operations, which will then enable us in a later stage to take data-driven decisions towards CapEx measures, where we then involve partner companies such as E.ON, Vinci Facilities, Delta Controls, who can deal with energy supply, the energy demand side, where we deliver a subsequent set of data that can be used. But how do we get there in the first place? As mentioned, we're a software company based in Düsseldorf in Germany, and we developed the software that sits on top of already existing technical infrastructure, building management systems. So wherever you already have a central control layer for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, we can implement this software on top. And this software is reading in real time data from sensors, actuators in the building, from outside sources such as weather forecasts, solar radiation, aggregates all this data, brings it together in the cloud, and then takes predictive and proactive control decisions in order to achieve the same target comfort that you or your tenants have in those buildings with less energy consumption. This procedure enables us to have a direct impact in those buildings and achieve up to 40% in energy savings right away. How does it work? As mentioned, we take data from the building. This is obviously our main source. We have a cloud connection to outside sources. We bring all of that together in a cloud where we have an AI or machine learning based algorithm that is continuously running thousands of data points, trying to find the low-hanging fruits where we can adjust the heating curve here, close a valve a little bit earlier, lower the target temperature a little bit, in order again to reach same target comfort so that your tenants feel good, but with less energy consumption. And we do that based on data. Yeah? This data is not only presentable in our backend, but also in a front end that is visible to your facility manager, your property manager, and to you eventually as an owner, as an investor, as an asset manager. So that dashboard will enable you to have real-time monitoring, benchmarking, and analysis of what's going on in one or potentially more buildings. You have an anomaly detection included, so you take out the human error and automatically detect and get notified whether an equipment is running over the weekend, for instance, where it shouldn't, whether a sensor is defect or whatsoever. All of that being aggregated, we also deliver an API. So in terms of use certain energy management, ESG reporting tools, we're happy to integrate this data seamlessly via an open API. And all of that shall lead, you can imagine, to positive results, whereas here we showcase some of them. On one of those buildings, we will jump into a little bit more into detail, but we're covering commercial building space, meaning offices, hotels, retail centers, shopping centers, schools, and all of that across Europe, active at the moment in 7 countries, and serving our customers with a riskless business model. Riskless in terms of its low to no capex. We can start very quickly and achieve the first results, the first low-hanging fruits, as we call them, within the first 6 months after operation. And all that for a fixed monthly license fee that is not only allocatable to the tenants, who actually get the benefit in terms of reduced energy spend, but we also reduce the carbon footprint, and we can deliver all of that for roughly €1 per square meter per year. Now, that being said, let's jump right into it. Let's jump into a concrete case. And here, as I mentioned, I brought one of our customers from Berlin, Patrizia, you may know the name, large real estate company, large asset manager, among others in the real estate industry. And we started operating this iconic office tower of around 23,000 square meters last year in March. So we have now around 1 year of running time in that building. And during that time, simply by optimizing the way that heating, ventilation, and air conditioning are being operated, we've been able to achieve 24% on average in energy savings till date, not by installing anything additionally in the building, but really just by making it better what the building owner, the tenants, and everybody already paid for and are already living or working in on a daily basis. We do control several machines, starting from air handling units, heating networks, cooling towers, so everything around technical equipment that you can imagine. And what do we do basically? I have 2-3 control examples right here with me. So we go away from a static if else then approach that you can see on the left hand side, where you have a constant valve opening of 75%. And we transform that into a dynamic operation where we forecast what are the actual needs in this building, in this room, on this floor in the next 60, 120, 180 minutes based on weather data, building operation data, forecasts, and thermodynamic behavior, in order to transform it, as you can see here on the right-hand side, where it's listed as double control, to dynamic operation adjusted to the needs of the building, the needs of the tenants, the needs of the environment. And this enables us to have less valve opening, waste less energy into the rooms, into the space, but it's still achieve the same target comfort for those tenants. The same mechanism can be applied for cooling valves. This is essentially the same. Here we also see on most of the buildings, especially the existing ones, very fixed static rules, simply engineered by a human being some years ago or some decades ago, it depends. And we simply transform this here as well to the actual needs. So we have a forecast that calculates pretty accordingly or pretty accurately what is the actual need, how much cooling do we need right now, what is the optimum value that we need, and we can execute that right in the back end of the software without having to call the facility manager or to notify the facility manager to change that setting, but we apply that right away in the background. Again, this enables us to achieve tremendous results, which we can then prove in a statistically verified way, where we use a benchmark, a baseline that we develop for this particular building. So we take energy consumption from the past, we cleanse this data, we take out heating degree days, weather, cooling degree days, so weather data. Eventually occupancy, we've all been there during COVID, we had less occupancy in most of the buildings. To have an objective baseline where we can then compare the actual energy consumption of the building as we read it now on a monthly basis, and can clearly quantify and verify those savings achieved by the software. This will enable you as asset managers not only to have actionable insights and quantifiable insights, but also to have tangible savings that you can communicate to your tenants, that you can flag in your ESG report, and this database will enable you to take further CapEx decisions among sensors, among installing heat pumps, PV panels, whatever it is that is in your head right now. I'm sure our data about technical operation will help to make those decisions in a better and a more precise way. So how to achieve the same? If you look into your building portfolio, it's rather simple. Ask yourself if you're owning or operating a building that ranges from 5,000 square meter office building to up to 75,000 square meter or more airport terminals, multi-use buildings, university buildings, whatever it is. All that we need is a commercial building that already has a building management system in place. And ideally, in the first step, this is a bit more technical, communicates already via BACnet IP, which is an open protocol, an open standard, communicates with the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning devices. That being said, that's all we want to do today. So screen your portfolio, see if you can identify those low-hanging fruits, get in touch with us, and we can make it work. Again, buildings are already there, technology already exists. What we need now is execution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these presentations, Nico. And yes, I think without further ado and so on, I will pass on to Andy. We do have a couple of questions to you, Nico, but I think some of the questions are also relevant to Andy, meaning first Andy, and then we are going to move in the Q&A session thereafter. Thank you again.
Thanks, Nico. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Sumner. I'm the commercial director for Future Motors. I'll explain that in the presentation. I'm talking to you from actually from a customer site in London, and you might hear a bit of an echo. And the lighting, I'm afraid, is not the most flattering. So hopefully you'll forgive me. So I will share my screen, and hopefully, with a bit of luck, it will work. So, here we go. Right, so what am I going to cover today? So who we are, what we do, what are the outcomes, I guess the most important thing that you can expect from working with us, and a little bit on who we're doing it for, a couple of case studies. So Turntide, and I'll show a video in a minute, are a US-based business in Silicon Valley. I won't talk too much about them, but the video will explain the proposition in the business. But they're now a scale-up rather than a startup, and they've got some very significant investors like BMW, like Jeff Bezos, Amazon Climate Pledge Fund, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is Bill Gates' fund, and they just achieved unicorn status in the US over the last few months, which, as you all know, means a value of $1 billion plus. We were early investors in Turntide, and we're the exclusive distributor for Turntide around Europe, and we deal with distribution, installation, maintenance, and management. I'm now going to stop sharing screen and hand over to Roxana. We had a few technical issues on the video, but hopefully Roxana will be able to get it to work, and I can be quiet for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
We have done something incredible that many considered impossible until now.
Most of the time when people think of electricity, they think of lighting. But half of the energy in the world goes into electric motors. Motors are everywhere. Your air conditioner, your refrigerator, cars, conveyor belts. Half of the energy that goes into motors is wasted. So how do we make every watt of energy and electricity worthwhile?
A switch reluctance motor is not a new design of motor that typically are used in sort of bulletproof industrial applications where you want something to run for decades at a time. So think nuclear power plants, those sorts of things.
They weren't available for the rest of the world because it was too hard to control. And that's the thing that we've taken over the finish line.
Climate change is the biggest challenge of our time, and we need to do everything we can in our power to reverse it.
If we could replace every motor in the world with our technology, we could cut 25% of carbon emissions. Energy is all about supply and demand balance. We're totally focused on the demand side, so we're trying to reduce how much generation is required to still serve people. And that means that we can shut down the polluting fossil fuel burning generation sources like coal and oil and eventually natural gas. And then it accelerates the shift over to solar and other sustainable generation technologies. I first learned about switch reluctance motors about 6.5 years ago. What intrigued me at first was this thing is actually the simplest mechanical electric motor that can be made. But you need electronics and software that are very precisely shaping the current that go into that motor.
Well, you really should think of this as almost like a fighter jet. If the computers in that are not running, no human could fly that plane. But by being able to control it with a machine learning algorithm on relatively cheap compute power, now all of a sudden you can take something that is mechanically unstable and it ends up being more agile, and in this case more efficient, more powerful, and cheaper than any of the competing types of motors.
What I found was this really interesting patent that Mr. Piyush Desai had come up with.
The basic goal with an electric motor is to take electrical energy in and convert it into mechanical energy. For our motor, we apply a current to create an electromagnet, and we have a rotor that tries to align itself with the electromagnet we just created. So what we need to do is switch the current on and off, creating an electromagnet at the next coil, and the rotor tries to catch up and spin to align itself there. We have to switch the current on and off really fast, 20,000 times a second. The computing power, software, and sophistication required to do that made it quite simply impossible until now.
And it's finally not a hard decision to become more energy efficient. It's just good business. We look for where is there the biggest delta between what exists today and what is possible. So that's why we're focusing on buildings and agriculture as a big first market.
Many HVAC systems are essentially a single speed. They're on and off. Turntide motors have complete variable speed control. So you can run your motor at any speed and save tremendous amounts of electricity.
I was very skeptical at some of the claims that Turntide was making. 30 to 60 to even sometimes 70% more efficient in the real world. And to see those claims actually bear out and to be able to dig into the data that third parties had done independently was an exciting moment for me. We are installing Turntide's motors in our Spartanburg plant in order to drive efficiency and significantly reduce the cost of electricity. BMW iVentures decided to invest in Turntide because this company is about as close to a no-brainer as we've ever seen in the sustainability space.
If you ask anyone that works for Turntide, they're going to say that on a global scale, they are working to slash the energy consumption by half. And they're going to tell you that they're able to do that, and that is what they're going to do.
Our work has just begun.
Our roadmap is getting into much more advanced applications, so
Appliances,
electric vehicles.
aerospace.
A motor system that's intelligent not only can minimize energy use and maintenance for the motor itself, but can also propagate those savings into broader systems like HVAC, entire buildings, campuses, and smart cities.
You start to look at this as, fine, this is a product that maybe can save some people some money, but in real terms, they can save hundreds of thousands of lives and hundreds of millions of tons of CO2 going into the atmosphere.
Replacing the motors just in buildings, just in the US, it would be the carbon equivalent of giving the world a brand new Amazon rainforest. And if you branch out to the entire world's impact, it's about the equivalent of adding 7 Amazon rainforests carbon impact. But until now, this was just an idea.
If you enjoyed this video, give us a like and subscribe to FreeThink for more great stories about the people and ideas.
Right. Hopefully that was reasonably instructive. I'll share my screen again and conclude the presentation. Here we go. Okay, so that video was all very interesting, but why does it matter, and why does it matter to property owners and to asset managers, and should it be a priority? So, and I'm kind of glad that my numbers match Nico's in the previous presentation. We didn't collude before the session today. So HVAC accounts for anywhere between 40 and 80% of the energy used in a building, depending on occupancy. And of that, about 50% is used in motors that drive air around the building, which is the principal application that we deploy. We'll save anywhere between 30 and 70%, and I'll show you a couple of examples later where we've done that on replacing existing motors. And so therefore the overall building impact can be anywhere between 6 and 28% reduction in electricity consumption, which is, in the same way that Nico mentioned, I would suggest fairly material in making buildings more efficient. ROI, so there is capital that needs to be deployed in order to fit this solution, but typically the ROI is below 3 years, and with the energy price inflation that we've seen recently, typically now anywhere between 1 and 2 years, and we've had some examples of less than 1 year. Just to sort of highlight that in terms of regulation. Those of you who have properties in the UK will be aware of EPCs. I understand there are similar legislative changes around the rest of Europe. So very quickly, EPCs from next Friday or next Saturday have to be a minimum of an E, but very quickly, coming up in 2027, they have to be classified as a C and then a B by 2030. So there are some very very compelling reasons to significantly improve the efficiency of buildings and comply with EPC legislation. And if you run the maths, and we've done this with EPC inspectors, then I won't go through the whole of the slide, but the impact that we can have in moving from an E to a C is anywhere between 25 and 100%. So, a material contributor to making buildings more compliant with, certainly with UK legislation. Very quickly on the motor itself, it was explained very much in the video. A couple of really important takeaways from this. The first one is it's a very simple proposition. You simply replace the existing motor with our motors, hook it up to the existing fan and propulsion system, and away you go. It's fully BMS agnostic, so we'll integrate with all BMS systems, so Bagnet, Modbus, 0 to 10, 0 to 1000 millivolt. And as I said, it's completely has variable speed, which takes me nicely on to the next slide. So I'm not going to dwell on too much on the physics, but many customers ask us, well, how do you get the savings that you claim? And it's really 3 reasons. Reason number 1 is, as they showed in the video, the inherent design of the motor and the electronics that drive it to ensure that the minimum amount of electricity is delivered to the motor to do the duty. And the other 2 reasons are the characteristics of the motor. So traditional motors, if not running at their design torque, become significantly less efficient, which is the top right graph, the blue line being us, the green line being traditional induction motors. And the bottom right-hand graph is speed. So most of your buildings will have HVAC motors that are controlled by VSDs or inverters, so variable speed drives. The problem with those is as they slow the motors down, they become significantly less efficient. And you can see the blue line means that we maintain our efficiency, and so that's where the significant savings come from. To highlight that in a real life example, this is a large international airport based in the UK, and that they use demand control, so the motors speed up and down based on CO2 and footfall. And as the motor slows down, you can see that we move from a like for like 50 hertz full speed saving of 28%, right down to an 81% saving when you slow that motor down to only 30 hertz. And the final example is a large global banking headquarters based in London. So we've replaced a large HVAC motor with a series of smaller motors with new fans, and the energy saving versus the existing HVAC motor is 58%, which is fairly significant, I would argue. So much so that we've just had confirmation from the bank that they're going to roll out the solution across the remainder of their headquarters and into a number of their larger branch networks around the UK. So if I were to summarize our proposition in 3 points, the first one is it is material and does have a significant effect on buildings efficiency. Secondly, it is a very simple solution, a simple drop-in replacement with minimum disruption and downtime. And thirdly, it gives a very healthy return on investment. And thank you for listening, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Andy, for the presentations. We very like the way of presenting as well, not just ambitions, but also, we say, real life and real time information that enable us maybe to understand what you are talking about. With Nico, he mentioned the sweet spot, something between 5,000 square meters to 75,000 square meters. Is that also similar for you, or what is the sweet spot of buildings that might, require and where we could generate some serving using your technology?
The honest answer is pretty much all buildings, so not residential, so commercial buildings only. Commercial buildings only that have HVAC motors of above 2.2 kilowatts, which are most commercial buildings. Where we're focusing particularly, Achille, is in property owners and asset managers, where we've got a number of relationships around London. Our mission is to make the biggest difference we can in the shortest possible time. We're driven by a passion to reduce carbon and reduce electricity, and therefore, targeting big buildings is where you're going to get the biggest potential payback. So the bigger the better.
Yeah, very good. Again, possible to share some questions and so on. We do have as well a couple of questions. We are going to onboard those questions in what we have. And my observations, because I think I'm going to get back at home and so on, and to tell my kids, I'm working in the real estate business. We are not providing, I would say, space to people, but we are saving the life of many people, because that's what I heard from your presentations, Andy. That's good, this element around the missions of what we are doing, maybe that elevate a bit the perception of what we are doing. That's a good point. I heard a couple of times the topic about magic from the capability of the solutions, 40% serving, more than 50% in some case with you, Andy. And I'm trying to think about, if this is possible, why do we need a PropTech to come to these solutions? Why all those company buildings, the technical facilities in those buildings and so on, all those people, the entire industries did not come to these ideas? If that's so simple, why? What was the barrier to the traditional players?
Well, from my perspective, and I guess the same from Nico, is this wasn't invented until the last few years, right? So, necessity generally is the mother of invention. And if you think about, a building's energy consumption, whilst economically, it always made good sense to minimize energy consumption, energy was relatively inexpensive in comparison to the way that it is now. And so, necessity drives invention and drives entrepreneurial endeavor. And I think, two things have, the stars have aligned in that. Clearly, there's been a bigger sustainability agenda, which has accelerated over recent years, and now is, cannot be ignored. We cannot ignore the fact that that climate change is the biggest problem that we need to tackle, and therefore, that drives innovation. And secondly, over the last 18 months or so, for reasons that we all know, energy prices have significantly increased and are unlikely to go back to where they were only 18 months, 2 years ago. You put those two things together, that's driven the kind of innovation that we're delivering. And I can't speak for Nico, but I assume there's a similar level of thinking in Dabbel. And so now, now's the time.
Nico, and your take on that, Nico?
Absolutely. I would confirm that, first of all, business models or traditional business models from large industry players come from a time where hardware was the thing. So on hardware worldwide, they built distribution channels and fairly simple software frameworks around it that made a really good business that created lock-in effects. Whereas the energy spent indeed was not that big of a topic. You mentioned it, this fund in 2014 or 15 that you mentioned, climate neutral. They took out the word climate neutral because maybe back then nobody really cared about the energy spent. Sustainability was not that high in the agenda. Energy costs were not as high as nowadays. And social, environmental pressure was not where it is as of now. And now you have those big global players, and it's just very hard for them to adapt and to radically change towards the new normal that we're facing today, because they've built their organizations, they've built their plans, their ways of doing things. And you don't change a company, let's mention Siemens or something, from one day to the other. So you need disruption coming from within. And we do see a large demand also from traditional industry players to work towards that direction. And that's why we are, I guess, also speaking today in this panel about sustainability and how to achieve low-hanging fruits. So I would definitely confirm what Annie just mentioned.
And also related to one of the questions that we received so far and so on, my question to you maybe first, and maybe Andy as well, your take on that would be good. What is more difficult to do? To have these ideas or to convince the real estate industry to adapt and to adopt and to buy your service? What is more difficult for you?
I'd say definitely the second. So we're facing a very traditional industry, and I'd say similar to what Andy just mentioned, or in the video was shown, it's a no-brainer. There are no-brainer solutions out there with low to no capex, fairly quick payback periods, or no payback period at all because it's self-financing from the very beginning. However, you face very traditional structures. You have a very fragmented value chain consisting of asset managers, property managers, facility managers, other service providers around BMS systems, around HVAC equipment, and everybody wants to participate or needs to participate somehow, and that makes it challenging to bring everybody on the same page, on the same table. And the second point, maybe I would mention, especially in the real estate industry, the level of available data from buildings, especially on the technical side. What types of equipment do you have? How old is it? Which protocols are being used? How are the integration capabilities? That is kind of a black box that is being opened, at least it feels like that in the last 2-3 years, and going more into the future of really uncovering what do I actually have in my portfolio besides square meters, rent per square meter, tenants, etc., but really facing the technical side of things. So therefore, I would say the execution are more difficult than the idea, because once you're in the building, you typically find lots of low-hanging fruits to achieve.
Great. Yeah, please.
I would just say exactly what Nico said. The sentiment is exactly the same, and I guess it's up to the audience today to cut through all of those traditional barriers in order to make these things happen. And like everything else, where there's a will, there's a way. And I'm sure most of your audience now have the will.
Yeah. And a question to you, because it's a kind of call for action to the audience, but the question that I would have, what's the numbers on that, and what is the time requested in order to get your device and your system into a buildings?
Well, for us, it's really all about the return on investment, as I mentioned in the presentation. We can, you will get your money back in 2 years. That is a fantastic investment, right? If you looked at a 5-year horizon, you get 2.5 times your initial investment back. That is, that is I would invest. If my bank gave me a 2.5 times return over 5 years, that's where my money would be. And so therefore, I would suggest that finding the capital is always hard, but if you look, and there's always competition for finding capital, but the outcomes that we deliver, I believe, and you'd expect me to say this, but I genuinely believe, warrant serious consideration of deploying a portion of your capital in our solution.
And what are we talking about? 5,000 square meter buildings in London?
Would be anywhere between 50 and 100,000 pounds, so 60 to 120,000 euros, something like that.
Additional spending in year 2 or 3?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Zero.
My question to you, Nico, you said it's a kind of recurring spending with your device. Why do we need that? Why not spending one time at the beginning, and that is, why is it required? What's the value of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Fair question. Because we're facing a dynamic environment which needs continuous dynamic updates of those set points. So as you can imagine, maybe a building as of today will not have the same usage, the same insulation coefficient, the same technical characteristics in 2 years from now. And people come and go, sun shines or doesn't shine. In London, it usually rains, and in Düsseldorf as well. Sometimes the sun is shining. So you need to adjust, depends on those conditions, and you need to adjust 24/7. You cannot rely on a human being to do everything correct. Also, usually within the facility management industry, you change every 2-3 years the contractor. So somebody new comes in, they have to get to know the building, they have to get to know the equipment, how everything is running, how the tenants feel. And the software can simply automate that, learn that, and enhance it with smart algorithms across time. So that also in 3 years from now, we'll ensure that 100% of the time we adjust the heating curve, the fan speed, the ventilation volumes in just the right amount. And we do that now where we have the biggest impact, because we also fix, let's say, radical issues that have been running there maybe in the past. But looking forward, you need that in order to ensure the status stays the same. And I just wanted to emphasize, we collect data 24/7, not only for a week, but for the whole time we're active in the building. So in 3 years, you're planning a refurbishment, you're planning to rip out the gas boiler and exchange it for a heat pump. We can use this data, provide it to the third party who is going to do that, or to perform that refurbishment and installation of this equipment. And we can tell them certainly accurate, how much volume do we need, how big do you need to dimension this equipment, and what are the hurdles for installation.
Yeah. Meaning we are not just having a kind of fantastic panelists today, but we have potential joint venture synergy between what you are doing, Andy, and the learning from these sides of the equation. So my question maybe as well to you, Nico, because you mentioned the sweet spot, 5,000 square meters and so on. I can imagine that a lot of players who has smaller buildings, meaning no chance to do something for them?
There are chances for sure, but usually in those smaller buildings, you don't have the technical infrastructure yet in place, meaning building management systems. So in those cases, you would need to install hardware to have the connectivity, the capabilities of doing something. You could, for instance, we do that with selected pilot customers at the moment, self-learning heating valves. So you exchange the at the moment static heating valve with a dynamic one. We call that smart retrofit, and you apply essentially the same algorithm. So you install this hardware, you install some sensors, a gateway, bring this data into the cloud, and we can operate those heating valves predictively also in smaller buildings. But and there, I'd say we follow a similar philosophy as Andy just mentioned. We want to focus on the big impact first. So the large buildings that already have this infrastructure in place, where we do not need to charge any CapEx or very low CapEx, can produce results right away, and then move on to all the more fragmented, smaller buildings.
We have in Europe something around 130 billion of assets, meaning million, pardon, not billion, buildings, 130 million of buildings, and 75% of those buildings are residential buildings. Are we missing the big pictures when we then focus on the commercial side, or are you thinking about the next step to the residential to address the impactful and relevant market? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, from our perspective, I think there's a danger that you spread yourself too thinly, and what we're very good at doing is designing and implementing our solution into large buildings, and that's our focus. We're experts at doing that. Maybe one day in the future we can, for electric motors, there aren't, certainly, there aren't the same volume of electric motors in residential as there are in commercial buildings. But I think, there are lots of other organizations who've got, very innovative solutions for residential. I think, for us, it's really important that we, there's an English expression that's a stick to the knitting. So working. So stay very focused on doing what we do really well, and that's our plan.
Your take on that?
Similar for us, I'd say the commercial building space, just in terms of absolute numbers, is gigantic, and there's a lot of things to do. And this is by nature, so to say, organically, the low-hanging fruit, because you have more equipment, you have more technical installations rather than in residential buildings. So with less input, the Pareto principle kind of, with less input, you can have a much bigger output. So this is where we should focus first, do that, and then see what we can do in the residential spaces. This is usually also by experience even more fragmented than the commercial space. So let's start there, have a proof of concept that it works certainly well in particular asset classes, industries, and then move on in parallel towards the residential area. This is our main focus at the moment.
Yeah, we have 7 minutes left and so on for the discussions. And but before we move to maybe the final comment from your side and so on, and other questions, I think generally speaking, that's fantastic, meaning to have something to address specific issues, meaning the motors, the engine on your side, and ND, and to your side, the facilities, having a software on the heatings and ventilation systems. That is a good start, but it's not all what we have. The clients and so on, those has to solve in terms of the total improvement that they could do in order to meet their goal and so on. Are you taking as well about cooperations with other parts and so on in order just to have a holistic view on all the measures that here could be done, or are you sticking to your part? And what do you see the evolution of this in this area?
Well, I'll start perhaps, and I'll keep it very brief. Yes, we are collaborating with other people. We haven't collaborated with Nico, but I almost certainly will after seeing his presentation today. You know, from our perspective, there are two things that are going to make a building more efficient. So, changing the infrastructure, so which is partly what we do, and then the control of the building. They are not separate things. They are inextricably linked, and we're collaborating with other organizations that focus on the control side. So I think it is about partnership. If you look at our solution and Nico's solution, the sum of those two may actually be greater than the parts. So I think it's really important.
I agree. Collaboration is key, especially in this industry, as it is so fragmented and everybody takes a small piece of work to do around big buildings, big facilities. That is also why we think it makes sense to approach a building in such a way that we do not retrofit it at the very first sight. We optimize it as it is. We first reduce demand side of energy to then, in a data-driven way, tackle the supply side. And for that, we bring in partner companies, as Andy mentioned, not yet together, but for instance, E.ON, the energy company, ISS as a facility manager, Delta Controls as a BMS company, that can further enhance this equation of measuring the way towards net zero, because our approach is usually that customers are hesitant towards spending. You can spend millions right away, right, in refurbishing a building, and our approach would be, hey, achieve trust first, achieve results first that are measurable. You can quantify them, you can see them in your pocket or in your tenants' pockets. Have a database, and this database then is the one that other players can benefit from. For instance, energy companies, BMS companies, other service providers, in order to be able to take efficient and data-driven decisions. But then in the end, we need to bring it together.
Super. Any final comment from your side, Nico, before I pass on to Andy? Any final comment, topic that you say, I have the audience and so on, I would like to pass that on to them. What would be the message to them?
Absolutely. I think we have a forest of solutions, a forest of challenges, and with that many trees in front of us, it's easy to oversee the forest, so to say.
Yeah.
So instead of spending all of our time and effort on planning the big measurements, the very capex intense things, let's fill our day to tackle a little bit more the low-hanging fruits, which will not only enable us to have an impact now, but will also lead the way or guide the way for take much deeper, much better informed decisions in the future. Because in most of the cases in any building, there are things that can be improved right away. And every day that we are not doing that, that we, an explanation mark, waste the time on making Excel sheets and calculations of CapEx measures, we could invest it in there. Buy us time, not only on a crime pathway, but also financially for our tenants, for our environment, to then take the heavy measures in the future.
And you are saying, you know how motors and engine work, meaning you are going to use 1 minute to a final comment, and you are pro in speed.
So, so my final thought is, look, look, we're all human beings. You know, when I get up in the morning and I look at myself in the mirror, I take some. You know, I'm not a young man anymore, but I take a lot of personal gratification and pride in believing what I do actually matters. And you know, that helps me get through the day, frankly. And what I'd love is for the for, you know, the audience of participants to help me make it matter even more. So my final thought is really, you know, whether it's with me or with others that do what I do, then, you know, it's really important that we accelerate our plans and get on with it, because this is going the wrong way, and people like Nico and I can help at least make a bit of a difference, and, you know, that's what we're here to do.
Super. Thank you very much. You realize we have a lot of more questions, but we knew that maybe today is not to end the discussion, it's just to start the discussions. And we hope that this has been a very enjoyable conversations. And yes, I think we are going to share the presentation to the group as well, meaning don't hesitate to get in touch to each others if you have further questions. And yes, that was the goal of this session today, to present the solutions, to present not the solution, but a solution that could help, a starting point. And yes, thank you for your time, your attentions. And as well, Andreas, thank you for coming with these ideas to setting the sessions. And yes, looking forward to the next possibility to carry on the engagement. Merci, bye-bye.
Thank you very much.